do me a favor? Just turn around. We do have to cuff you up. Go ahead and put your hands behind your back.
Any chance that you're pregnant?
No.
An Ohio woman is detained by U.S. Marshals after an 8-month-old boy is found dead.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God.
Melanie, take a deep breath. Hey, Aaron.
We're bringing you the shocking moment she breaks down on body cam, along with the horrific details laid out in court documents as police learned she was reportedly running an unlicensed daycare out of her house. We're on the case presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. This story is so tragic and sad. It's just hard to comprehend. It's out of East Canton, Ohio. And the story surrounds an 8-month-old boy who was just beginning his life, but now he is being mourned by loved ones after his life was cut way too short. His mom left him in someone else's care while she went to work. That is something that happens every day across the country in almost every single community. And as a parent, it's not something that even crosses your mind. You drop your child or your children off at daycare, and you expect that when you come at the end of the day to pick them up, that they will be there and you're going to bring them home. But that didn't happen in this particular case out of Ohio that we're talking about today. It led to a moment where a daycare worker is caught on police body cam and she's hyperventilating as she is slapped with handcuffs with the help of the U.S. Marshals. And worst of all, this daycare allegedly shouldn't even have been open. Now, we're going to get to more of that and that arrest body cam footage later in this episode, but we need to talk about how we got to this point. So we have our hands on the incident report directly from police in East Canton, along with a civil complaint that is laying out shocking allegations of how this daycare was run, leading to the devastating death of this young boy. And of course, all of these are allegations at this point, and those facing charges are innocent until proven guilty. But I want to jump right into it here. So all of this begins on March 10th of this year. It is 1:39 in the afternoon when an officer with the East Canton Police Department responds to a home to help paramedics with a medical emergency. And this medical emergency involves an 8-month-old boy, and his name was Grant Simmons. When the officer arrives, medics were already on their way to the hospital. So the responding officer talked to a woman who was still present at the home. It's a 45-year-old woman. Her name is Melanie DiMarzio. According to the incident report, DiMarzio pointed the officer in the direction of Simmons' mom, who is also still at the home. The officer and the patient's mom then go to the hospital. Now, as emergency staff attempted to revive the 8-month-old boy, the officer spoke with his mom. Quote, she advised that she dropped off her son to the babysitter earlier in the morning when the babysitter later contacted her by phone, stating that the child was not breathing. She stated that she spoke to her by phone at approximately 1:20 p.m. She stated that she had no indication of what could have happened to the child. A nurse came into the hallway and assisted the mother into the room where the child was pronounced deceased a short time later. Now to this day, it is unclear exactly what caused Simmons' death, but there is a civil complaint that was filed by the village of East Canton that paints a chilling picture of DiMarzio's daycare operation. So the court documents were filed on March 20th after the city learned that she was planning to reopen her daycare on March 23rd, which is just 13 days after the incident at her home where a child passes away. This lawsuit claims that inside the property, East Canton police discovered DiMarzio was providing childcare services at her home to several infants and toddlers. And one of the big questions we're going to talk about in this case is from a legal perspective, a criminal perspective. When does babysitting turn into an unlicensed daycare? That is a question that's very much at the center of this case. Now, when police interviewed DiMarzio, she allegedly had difficulty recalling how many children she babysat on a day-to-day basis, but she reportedly said she has between 5 and 10 children that she babysits at the property in exchange for $45 per day paid in cash. The civil complaint also laid out the following allegations. Quote, officers learned that defendant Melanie DiMarzio did not have appropriate supervision or sleeping arrangements for infants and toddlers at the property. Defendant Melanie DiMarzio indicated she would either prepare food for children at the property or otherwise give children food provided by parents. Defendant Melanie DiMarzio did not have current CPR certification or any other medical training. It did not have any formal protocol for administering medications such as Tylenol, eye drops, or amoxicillin, but informed officers she would follow any instructions given to her by parents. Defendant Melanie DiMarzio admitted that she had no emergency plan in place for former protocol in the event of a fire or other emergency at the property. Defendant Melanie DiMarzio further acknowledged that she did not utilize any baby monitors or cameras at the property to monitor children who were housed in different areas of the property. On the date that Grant Simmons unfortunately passed away, defendants had at least 5 children staying at the property, including him, 2 children who were 23 months old, a 1-year-old child, a 3-year-old child, and a 4-year-old child. For one of the children, who was 1-year-old, defendant Melanie DiMarzio informed officers with the East Canton Police Department that she did not know the child's last name. In addition to DiMarzio's alleged lack of responsibility within the daycare's operation, the lawsuit also accuses the business itself of being unlicensed, exceeding Ohio's limits on the number of children under the age of 2, along with never obtaining the required conditional zoning certificate to operate within the home. As a result of these allegations, the civil complaint seeks to shut down DiMarzio's daycare for good, in addition to monetary damages. The same day the lawsuit was filed, a temporary restraining order was placed on the daycare, meaning it needed to cease operations immediately pending a further hearing. That order was converted into a preliminary injunction on March 31st, so the daycare will no longer be able to operate as the lawsuit moves through the legal process. As for this civil matter, a final pretrial hearing is scheduled for November 12th of this year, and the civil trial is slated for December 28th. So remember, that's just the civil side of the case that we're talking about today. So we can turn here now our focus to the criminal implications. So now we're going to fast forward to July 16th, and DiMarzio is indicted by a grand jury on a felony first-degree charge of involuntary manslaughter, a third-degree felony charge of endangering children, and another third-degree felony charge of involuntary manslaughter. If convicted on all counts, she could face more than 20 years in prison and over $40,000 in fines. So we're going to get to the moment DiMarzio is arrested, which was on July 21st by the East Canton Police Department with assistance from the U.S. Marshals, 5 days after she was indicted by that grand jury. But this is how that played out on police body cam footage.
You gotta do that. Okay. If you want to have her come out, we'll get her down there, get her booked, and then come on, honey.
This is one, I understand your job.
Right.
But this is a woman that's about ready to have it.
We'll get her taken care of.
You're a very good appearance.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? You've been here before.
All right.
I don't have to
You want to leave all your children here, so that way you don't gotta put it in your property. Just leave it all here.
What you saying? You'll call.
Yeah,
She'll get the call. She's going to get booked, and then she'll probably see the judge, and she'll be able to give you guys a call.
She'll get booked in, and then she'll get a free phone call when she's gets put in the home. They need cut off. Okay, they can cut them off there. They have equipment to do it.
Just take a deep breath. It's just a warning. I can't go anywhere, so she called me.
What?
You guys transporting you want us to?
Step on down here. Take a deep breath.
We can.
Don't fall. Do me a favor. Just turn around. We do have to cuff you up. Go ahead and put your hands behind your
Any
back.
chance that you're pregnant?
No.
Okay.
No. My.
Just relax. Palms together. Like you're praying. There you go.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God.
Melanie, take a deep breath.
Slow down.
Hey, Aaron. Or actually, you can do it. Hey, Aaron, you can break down. You want to give her a pat down?
My.
One step forward.
Don't fall backwards. Take a breath. Take a breath. Take a breath.
Don't lock your knees.
All right, I'm sure she'll be giving you guys a call here shortly. All right.
Give it about an hour, hour and a half.
Melanie, just breathe. Just breathe. You gotta breathe.
We gotta get a picture of
Oh my God.
one foot at a time. We go a little bit. All right, don't go anywhere, okay? All right, guys. You got handcuffs?
Good.
I do.
All right, I'm glad.
I'll give them back to you.
I was worried. I know this is kind of a big deal. I'll cook your guys' case for you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
No worries.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Yeah, you guys are going to the wrong address there.
Melanie, try to breathe. Try to breathe. Calm down. Calm down. Okay. Just breathe. Breathe. See right here.
DiMarzio was booked into the Stark County Jail on a $100,000 bond, which was posted 2 days after her arrest. According to her court docket, she is required to wear a GPS monitor in addition to other pretrial release conditions. She is due back in court for a pretrial hearing on August 19th, and we're going to be sure to monitor this case as it continues to unfold. But before we bring in our guest, retired NYPD Detective David Sarney, I do want to share a little bit more about the life of the person whose life was just beginning, the person at the center of this case, 8-month-old Grant Simmons. And this was taken from his obituary. Quote, "Though Grant's time here was not nearly long enough, he touched the lives of all those who were lucky enough to know him. Grant was full of life and was always smiling. He enjoyed Coco Melon and his toy excavator. He will always be remembered as his mommy's little stink." End quote. Join us now to talk more about this is retired NYPD Detective David Sarney. Thank you, as always, for being with us here on Law and Crime. And I think a really good person to talk to about a case like this because, you worked in New York. I feel like we often hear about unlicensed. This is a case out of Ohio, but like New York sees its fair share of these unlicensed daycares, which, there's a lot of risk there. And just what stood out to you first with the body cam video when you watch that?
Well, when you watch the body cam video, you see speaking to the female who's being arrested, didn't know her name at the time, but when you see being arrested, you could see she's almost unconsolable and uncontrolled. she's having almost an attack, a panic attack. But when you have U.S. Marshals there and the police are arresting you, it's the first time probably getting arrested. You're going to see that. The process went very smoothly for that. You didn't see a lot of interaction between the police who made the arrest and the defendant in this case. But what you see is, unfortunately, are there hundreds and thousands of these. The only time we find out about these daycare centers being unlicensed is when a tragedy like this happens. And to have an 8-month-old die in their custody, and families, and again, I talk about always about the legal side and the police side of it, but there's a social side to this where if you have nowhere else to go and it's such a cheap, affordable daycare, you let a lot of things slide as a family or as a parent. You really can't, because you're leaving them in the custody and care of that person for how many hours? And $45 a day is relatively cheap, but to what cost is it for you when something like this happens? And, I can't imagine how the parents are when your 8-month-old dies in this place.
Yeah, I mean, look, this isn't a parenting, podcast, but like the idea, like daycare is just unaffordable. Like licensed daycares is unaffordable for so many people. And like you look at this story and you have a mom that drops off her son and she goes to work. This isn't someone who's just like going off on their own or whatever. Like she is out there grinding. And you think of like the options to watch your child. There's not a lot out there that you can afford. I mean, it's thousands of dollars a month, typically, daycares. And so like $45 a day, there's that option. And like, it's just, you just assume that you are going to be picking your child up at the end of the day. The boy dies in March, and then the daycare owner, if you want to call her that, owner, didn't really own a daycare, just, the suspect in this case, she's arrested in July. What do you make of that timeline of how long it took to make an arrest?
Well, you have to go through several factors. You have to then go to legitimacy. You have to look for the licensing, because it takes time to build a case like this. Because even though you have a death of a child, does that necessarily mean the death was due to negligence? And that's why autopsies are coming in, the investigation forward on that, talking to the owners of the daycare, finding out that they have how many kids they have in their care, which is too many for that age. Their ability to handle emergencies, which were very lacking. They didn't have CPR certification. Their food sources were pretty much from the families. When you deal with families' daycare, and I say the $1,000 you spend, you have to really vet them out. And I understand you want to you try to do the best you can, but always vet these individuals to determine if they're legitimate, especially at that cost. You could have an understanding that they're not. Because, when you talk about that investigation, an 8-month-old dies in their care, you're going to do the background. You're going to do the workup on the location. You can do a workup on the owners. And you find out that they had no valid certification or licensing. She should never have, if it was 1 or 2 children, maybe you get away with something like that. But she had too many kids in her care. She didn't have the ability to handle that type of situation. In an emergency situation like this, she said, I think I listened to the 911 call, that her mother's doing the CPR. And did she have equipment for that? Did she have the availability for that? And it seems she didn't. And this is why it tugs at the heartstrings when you talk about these things. From a legal standpoint, you have to understand the criminality involved. She was negligent in her care. She was not properly licensed, thereby the involuntary manslaughter charge. But when it comes to the family, you really have to really vet these individuals out, these daycares. And the money that you're paying, it was cheap and it was affordable. And the family thought that this person was the one to best care for them. And, based on the investigation and also the civil aspect to this, she wasn't. And neither is the daycare center itself.
One thing I found interesting is because like in some of the police documents, they consider her a babysitter, Melanie DiMarzio. But this is a daycare. And it's like, is there really even a difference? It's like, at what point does a babysitter become a daycare operator? It's like we've all, if you're a parent, like, you hire someone to look after your kids. Maybe you're going out that night, maybe you're going away for a weekend, and then you pay a certain fee. But like, does that matter from like a legal standpoint of it, where it's like clearly, according to law enforcement and the civil suit that's part of this, they believe that she was running a business where this just wasn't like a babysitting type operation. This was a daycare. But does any of that, I mean, certainly it doesn't really matter when it comes to this young boy who loses his life, but just in general with the trouble that she could be facing, how much does that actually matter that it was, they believe, an unlicensed daycare?
Well, the amount of children she had in her care and custody, that was the key. She had too many children under the certain age that they were required to have a license, and she wasn't apt to do it. She didn't have a staff. There was no real protocols or procedures in case of emergencies. There was no true sleep areas for the kids, no activity areas that were maintained or managed. And that's why when you talk about daycare center costs, it's because the licensing is so important. You want to make sure the children that are being in that care and custody are properly cared for, are properly monitored. She had no baby monitors. She didn't have enough. This was a babysitter who took on too much. And unfortunately, you have the end result of a death. And this happens, unfortunately, you'll see these daycare centers. The only time you know about these unlicensed ones is when something happens badly. And that's the issue you have here. I feel for the family. You know, you're put in a bad spot. You are. You don't know what to do. This person has maybe a word of mouth. We don't know how she advertised her business, because it is a business when you start almost warehousing kids in your house. That's a warehousing thing, and thereby it's a business. No signs to say to daycare center, just word of mouth. I gather what happened, and those kids. I don't know what her relationship was to the parents or other parents there. But the babysitter thing changed the minute when you took on so many other infants and kids.
What do you make of the fact? I just found it shocking that you have this case where this young boy loses his life, and we'll talk a little bit more. It seems unclear at this point, the exact cause of death, but she tries to open up the daycare again. You know, I mean, typically, you know, I think of some of the sad cases we've had where even the licensed daycares, you know, it's hard to come back from that, you know, to even open whether or not there was any wrongdoing whatsoever. What does that tell you? Maybe from the criminal side of things, when you're looking to prosecute someone, that this was a person that had this happen and then continues on and allegedly tries to reopen the operation.
Yeah, that's a big thing. And you know, when I saw that she tried to reopen it after this incident, and I don't know if she had any prior incidents, and that's something they're looking into, any 911 calls or 311 calls, any aides that went to that house. So, but to do that, you know, on a legal perspective, you know, it seemed there's the lack of caring, negligence, maybe to that point where you think your system is better than what it is. I mean, you have a death of a child in your care. Whether the child died at the residence or at the hospital, it doesn't matter. To sit there and say, what I did was okay. Oh, I'll get over it. Let's start again. You know, if you went into a doggy daycare, and I'm talking about just dogs and pets, would you want to send your dog to a location that had a death of there? And that's the thing. Since there's no record of that and no one would have known about it, she could have found other clients and did the same thing with them and saying, I'm cheap, I'm available, and do this without anyone knowing that this death occurred. And that's why the courts did the right thing, at least the civil side of it, is to shut her down and to make sure that everyone knows that this daycare center is illegal and no longer allowed to operate.
Doesn't seem like, at least from what we can find, that the autopsy's been made public, or if there's a cause of death that's been determined. If, let's just say, the autopsy in a case like this is undetermined, that they don't have the specific cause of death, but you know that there were things, at least from what's being alleged at this point, there were too many kids there. She didn't even know the last name of some of the kids, which was a detail that was included in the police report. Can you still move forward with a manslaughter charge, even if you can't potentially prove that specifically she did something that caused this child to lose their life?
Well, that's the issue. Now you have, you know, when we talk about an autopsy determines the cause of death, the manner of death. Sometimes the manner of death is undetermined. In New York, we call them circumstances unknown, pending police investigation, called the CUPI. So it's based on the police investigation moving forward to determine whether or not what she did at that time and place was negligent. And unfortunately, I hate to say this, do babies die in these circumstances? They do. We don't know at that point. That's why the autopsy, I don't know why it hasn't been revealed yet or to be put out there. But the circumstances will be based on what the investigators determine, because a medical examiner will base it on the physicality of the body. How did the person die? If it's accidental, natural, and in this case, if it's undetermined, it'll be based on the investigators' work on that. The investigative work by the East Canton Police Department to determine that, helping and assisting the coroner, the medical examiner, determine that this death was a negligent death based on whatever factors they have in play here. And that's why it's very important to have all those ducks in a row when you did that preliminary response to the scene. What did you observe? What was seen there? Where was the infant placed when this happened? When 911's called, that would be the initial response to the scene, and hopefully they got a lot of information from that. I know the body camera doesn't show anything inside the house, but we do, if there's something there, that will help assist the investigators and the ME to determine that manner of death.
In this case, like when you think of like negligence, I mean, she did not have, she was administering medicine, even if it's just Tylenol, like she wasn't licensed to give out the Tylenol. She was kind of like, well, whatever the parents want me to do, I'll do that. But that's not, that is different than maybe having the certification that some states have to administer. I mean, I just think of like for our kids, like any sort of like medication, you have to fill out a huge form and all of that, just to even get it into the building. Does that qualify? Like what qualifies as negligence in this case, even if you don't have the cause of death?
Well, the negligence will be based on what they have there. Was the child, and that's where the autopsy comes in, the toxicology reports will come in. That takes a long time, it takes several weeks for toxicology to come back. Was there medication given to this child? What were the instructions given? Is any documentation given from the parent to the daycare center about this child? Any issues that were outstanding? And that's why the interview with the parents, as horrific and horrible as it discussed, you have to talk to the parents to see if there's anything that they had, any other medical issues they had prior to their arrival at this daycare center. It's why it takes so long. And that's the thing. These cases, especially when it comes to baby deaths or infant deaths, do take a long time unless there's some outstanding factor that's physical, maybe a physical injury. We don't know if there's a physical injury sustained by this infant. CPR is being conducted, or was said to be conducted. Are there injuries consistent with that CPR conducting? And that's another thing. And that will hopefully show up for the autopsy if there's something along those lines. But it really you base it on the totality of the investigation from the detectives, what they get from the initial scene, what they get from the coroner, the ME's office, and then they bring that together to the prosecutor saying, do we have enough to prosecute? Because they had enough for probable cause. But to move forward, you have to prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt.
When it comes to like the job of an investigator in this case, because on one hand, you are investigating the death of this child. On the other hand, like to your point, I mean, there's thousands, tens of thousands of unlicensed daycares that are going on today right now. And we do see really sad cases like this one, unfortunately happen far too often. Like what work, and it seems like, the city side of it, the town is like making efforts to try and close this daycare down forever. But like, what's the role of the police in that part of it? Because like you have the investigation into the child, but then it seems like it's more always on the civil side where it comes to an investigation into exactly what was going on at this daycare.
Right. A lot of times we talk about these nuisances. We had nuisance abatement when locations were considered a nuisance. We had to have 3 types of criminal actions before we could actually close the place down by the law department. When you talk about this type of case, is the criminal side of it is the investigation upon the infant death. But the other part has to go through the court system, because we cannot particularly close it, because as a civil court is doing that. That's why it's on the civil side. Police we can close it down for a little bit, but she could reopen it. I mean, think about that. There was a death at her daycare center, not directly in her daycare center, but a death that took place started at her location. Yet she had, and we'll call it the audacity to reopen. And could the police have stopped that? Not particularly, because we make an arrest again about endangering the welfare. It depends what the penal law states that police can do to enforce. And I always say this: police do have 4 main responsibilities: reducing crime, preventing crime, apprehending people who are violators of law, and providing social services. How much social service we can do here, at least as far as East Canton Police Department, is take that information, give it to the civil court, and let the courts and the judge then determine to shut that place down forever.
And we'll see what happens next. Incredibly, incredibly sad case. I know there's some civil dates that go into December. And then, of course, you have here a very, very serious criminal case taking part. Retired NYPD Detective David Sarney, always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much, and stay safe.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify, and we are also streaming on Peacock. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.